light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. I was contemplating the other day the distinction between cognition and emotion. The best explanation I've heard of for autism, granting that every case is unique, what seems to be somewhat common judging by conversations I've had with other people who are autistic, is that it's like the brain has been wired backwards, and the autistic mind sees the details first and the generalities second or not at all, and the neurotypical mind sees the generalities first and the details second or not at all. So for the neurotypical person, they might look at a jigsaw puzzle and see a picture, the picture that all the pieces comprise, where an autistic person might look at a jigsaw puzzle and see 500 pieces competing for attention and try to figure out which piece most warrants attention first. And then only by understanding this piece and that piece and that piece and that piece to start to see how the pieces fit together to comprise a picture, but starting from the details and working toward the generalities. In utilizing my service dog, I describe him as my anchor, and there are a number of specific reactions he's trained to do to help me ground whenever the world feels overwhelming. But it's not always obvious to someone else what exactly he's doing to make it possible for me as an autistic person to cope. I suppose the most obvious example would be the person who uses a dog that's trained for a visually impaired person to help them maneuver through traffic, up and down streets, within unfamiliar spaces, and so on. The basic point of a service dog is to help the person with the disability, with the confirmed disability, cope with circumstances of daily life with which they otherwise could not cope. And I know that I absolutely depend upon having my service dog with me. So he travels with me everywhere, even on planes and so forth. I'm occasionally addressed by someone, though, who thinks he is there for emotional support. And I have to correct them and say, no, it's really not about whether I feel happy or sad or secure or insecure. It's about whether I have the ability to think. Whether there are so many details coming at me that it gets overwhelming, and my mind becomes like an antiquated computer, that if you try to open too many programs all at the same time, it's too much information rushing at the memory of the computer, and the whole thing locks up and the screen freezes and you can't think. There was one person I was having a phone conversation with once who was so adversarial that it became too many details trying to think of how to answer his questions and explain things clearly, and all the different words that I could use, but which words should I use in order to make him understand. And it got to the point where my brain was so locked up that for about 2 or 3 minutes I actually forgot how to talk, and I couldn't remember how to make words. The information just wouldn't come. It was like a frozen computer inside my head. And so he finally backed off at that point when he realized how serious it was. And after 2 or 3 minutes, my brain finally caught up, and I was able to speak again and to try to move through things in a very orderly, systematic, step-by-step fashion, and communicate what I was trying to express. But I had to wonder, in reflecting on that conversation afterwards, if this person required an epileptic with a dog trained to detect seizures before they happen. You know, do you require an epileptic to have a seizure in front of you before you believe them? In the midst of all that, of course, though, is this challenge of disabilities that are not visible. an epileptic. No one knows when they look at an epileptic that they are epileptic, and what if they're just someone claiming to be epileptic and they're not really? And it's, well, what do I have to do? Have a seizure in front of you to get you to believe? That is really such an inappropriate challenge to make that's why it's actually against the law to ask someone about their medical conditions, because it was recognized that this is such a basic violation of personal space and personal rights. But for me, as an autistic, it comes back to this question of what's the difference between emotion and cognition? What is the difference between how you feel and the ability to think? I mean, phrased that way, it seems fairly obvious, but I don't know that the ability or inability to think is necessarily obvious to someone on the outside. But that again brings us back to the question of why or how does a disability have to be obvious to those on the outside? The point is not to prove to you that I have a disability. The point is for me, as a person with a disability, to be able to live my life. And to understand that if someone is upset about something, it's generally not fatal. But if it's an inability to think in the wrong moment, that could be disastrous. If someone were to get halfway across the street and lose the ability to think because of some adversarial circumstance or attack or what have you, they might not know to continue across the street or how to get out of harm's way. It is vital, therefore, that if one ever meets someone with a service dog, that you do not distract the dog, you don't talk to the dog, you don't do anything that prevents the dog from noticing what it needs to notice, surveying the environment in whatever ways it needs to survey the environment, paying attention to its handler in whatever way it needs to pay attention to its handler. And there are times when my dog may get distracted by another passing dog or something, and I understand that that's part of his training, but at the same time, that's when I give the command, leave it, or over here, and bring his attention back to me so that he can continue doing his job. It's a very symbiotic kind of relationship, and I don't know how I will cope when presumably I will outlive my dog, how I will be able to get another dog and get up to speed with it quickly enough to be able to cope. In the meantime, I continue making these shows, sharing about my life experience, and perhaps that was a strange digression to begin this show with, but it comes back to this point of in what ways or to what extent are our emotions and our thoughts interconnected and inseparable. Every emotion, I've read, generates a particular enzyme or chemical or something scientifically measurable in the bloodstream. I don't know that we have the tools or meters or devices at the present time to map that from second to second, because some of these things occur in a split second. There have been studies done, however, that have attempted to get more at what chemicals make the brain work the way it does. My favorite explanation of emotion was from Elaine de Beauport in her book Three Faces of Mind, in which she said that emotions are simply the mind's ability or inability to meet its needs. So that when the mind is able to meet its needs, you feel happy. And when the mind is unable to meet its needs, you feel frustrated or angry or upset or sad or something, because there is a need that needs to be met in order for the positive emotions to return. The way that I found that liberating and empowering was that then when I feel an undesirable emotion, I don't have to focus on repressing or censoring or changing the emotion. I simply try to identify the need from which that emotion springs and address that need so that the cause of the emotion will disappear. If I can address things at the level of causes instead of at the level of symptoms, I feel like I will make a lot more progress and a lot more solid progress. If I'm simply trying to address the symptom, that's like taking a medication for pain, trying to repress the pain so you don't feel it. but not addressing what's causing the pain. And the more you repress the pain so that you don't feel it, the louder the body has to scream at you, because pain is the body's way of telling you that something is wrong, out of balance, needs to be addressed. And so when we listen to the pain, repressing it if we need to, so that it's a manageable level, but immediately proceeding to what is causing that pain, so that it's not a question of putting more drugs or more censorship or more whatever on top of it, but it's a sense of eliminating the cause so that there's no struggle with the pain to begin with, if we can find the cause and find an effective way of addressing it. So when I'm dealing with cognition, it's about getting to the cause of things. It's about understanding that the cognition are the train tracks underneath, and the emotions, in a sense, are the train that runs on top of the tracks. The train may be there or may not be there, but if the tracks aren't there, we're headed for disaster. The thoughts have to be there in order for anything in life to happen. When something interferes with the thoughts being there, that's where I begin to feel really, really autistic. When I'm at home, I don't know that my autism is so obvious, because at home I'm able to create an autism-friendly environment where I don't have things overwhelming me with too much detail or with too much chaos or things out of order. I've had people visit from time to time and say, well, you don't look autistic, and which is kind of one of those things you're not really supposed to say to a person with a disability, but it's amusing in a way, but it of course raises the question, so what does an autistic person look like? And well, it could look like any one of us, because autism is an invisible disability. In talking with this person on that occasion, though, I said, imagine that you go to visit a blind person in their own home. And in their own home, you really can't tell that they're blind. They're moving around the house just fine. They make it to the kitchen, back here and there and wherever, and they don't have a cane with them. And everything's fine. Well, you don't look blind. Are you sure you need that white cane? And you sure you need that seeing eye dog? And you sure you really are blind? And I was relating this to my friend Jean, who's been blind her whole life, and it's just a remarkable person who has now recently finished a doctoral degree, in fact. And I said, imagine what would happen if somebody broke into your house and moved all the furniture. And she just immediately said, oh my God, that would be a disaster. I suppose in a way, if someone were to do that in a way intending to be nasty or vicious or attack the blind person, it would possibly be an emotional experience close, I suppose it depends on the blind person, but getting close to a form of psychological rape, that you have essentially gone into their home and made their entire world completely unmanageable, destroyed their sense of self, the sense in which they and their environment are in a symbiotic relationship. I mean, it would be an absolute disaster and a vicious attack upon the person, because they would be unable to function in their own home. They would have no safe place in the world at that point. And they would be possibly going around for weeks trying to find where things have been moved to and where was such and such, and unless they could get someone who was not blind to come in and make up the difference, to help them out. But that's a sort of dependency. And the whole point of coping with disabilities is to reach toward one's own independence. The ability to think and speak for oneself. That it's not a blind person always having an agent, but a blind person being able to speak and act and think for him or herself. Not having, and I confess I've done it a time or two and wanted to slap myself when I did, but being somewhere with Jean and explaining to a store clerk, for example, how Jean and I interact to accommodate her visual impairment. And at one point in one such conversation, Jean just kind of reminded me that she could explain it better than, to the new person, better than I could explain it, as having heard it from Jean, who was standing right there, to this person, and so Jean could explain whatever she needed to, and I apologized profusely, and I had just forgotten myself, because it was, I guess to me it's kind of fascinating looking at the different way that somebody with a different disability experiences life, and I suppose I was sharing my enthusiasm at having learned that without realizing that I was overstepping my bounds and interfering with her self-agency. In that sense, having friends with disabilities can be a little bit more complicated, but I have never wondered if it was not also much more rewarding, because it gives me so many more ways of looking at the world, and so many more ways of experiencing the world, and of measuring the world, and of measuring life experience. And somehow we all find ways to get things done. It's just not the usual ways, or not the ways that perhaps the majority of the population uses. Do we feel happy or sad, or is it about being happy all the time? No, it's not about being happy all the time. It's about getting things done. How important are the emotions? They do have an effect. Every emotion is stored in our brain as some sort of chemical combination. They put enzymes in our blood to make us feel different ways. They affect medications different ways. They affect our immune system. On one hand, I would basically argue that one doesn't have to be happy all the time, as if it were some sort of inescapable state, such that it would make you insensitive to other emotions. But at the same time, being happy has been shown to have a definite boost in the immune system. That one's immune system really does function better when one has positive emotions. And then you stay a healthier person. So, on one hand, when trouble comes up, I try to address it effectively, quickly, and get it resolved. If there is a circumstance that I can't resolve because the variables are out of my control or something, then becomes a question of, if I can't fix it, maybe I need to move away from it. If I can't change the circumstance, maybe I need to change the environment. There have been times where I lived in undesirable neighborhoods just because that was the only place affordable to me, and several times in my life, in fact. But in each case, it got to a point where I had to say, look, I have a problem with this behavior, this circumstance in the neighborhood. Nobody else seems to want to do anything about it. If I'm the only one that has a problem with this, perhaps I should leave. It would be better for the community if the community were willing to address it and put an end to the problem, because then they would all be healthier too. If they don't feel motivated to do that, then, and I can't convince them, and all the evidence in the world isn't persuasive, and they're hell-bent on going down that troublesome path, then maybe it's time for me to step aside and let them make the choice they're hell-bent on making, and simply do what I can not to be caught in the backwash of it. There is a sort of contentment I have accomplished in finding a situation where I get to be myself, where I don't have to pretend anything, where I don't have to lie or remember what lies I've told, because I haven't. It's a duplicity that I think is problematic because of my autism, but it's somehow more than that. It's like there's a wholeness and a balance and an integration to being myself truthfully, honestly, and creatively, expressively even, in whatever situation or moment of life, that I get more out of it by being me than I would ever get out of it by trying to embody everybody else's projections and expectations. Others seem to have emotions about me because of the subconscious thoughts they're having about me. And I suppose this is speculative, because how could I possibly know? I'm not looking inside their head and so forth. I see them get upset, though, and I ask them why they're upset, and they can't give me an answer. And then when I look at their lives and look at how they interact with others, I may notice a pattern of how they always get upset whenever they encounter something unfamiliar or different from themselves, such that they're happiest when they're in a very controlled environment where everything is familiar and the same and homogeneous, and there's no diversity. And because in diversity there's a certain challenge, but at the same time as there's a challenge, there's an empowerment. In the same way that with thoughts, if we have thoughts without emotions, it gets very dry and computer-like, and we may be able to explain, but it won't answer the question of why. It won't mean anything. It may be just pragmatic or logistical, but it won't be fun. It won't be beautiful. It won't. To appreciate beauty and fun and adventure and excitement, those require the emotions to be integrated constructively and holistically and respectfully. Trying to say that laws should only be based on thoughts and not on emotions leaves life as this flat, dull thing that is really only fit for computers. And human beings, by their very nature, have emotions. They're there for a reason. They add color and dimension and fullness and wholeness to life, and they give us a why. They give us a reason to say, I'm doing this because it makes me happy, because there is some way that it answers the needs in my mind in a way that I don't feel any inadequacy, I don't feel any lack, I don't feel like I'm missing something. And because this activity or this relationship or this thing gives me this wholeness, I'm not even thinking about it, but I'm feeling good about it. And if I begin to look at why I feel good about it, then I understand what the thoughts are, but a lot of people haven't looked that far. Which is where it's curious to me, and I had to remind myself when I go to another country and I notice differences because I'm seeing it with fresh eyes, and someone who has grown up there has gotten so accustomed to everything that they don't even notice the details and they don't realize what the differences are. And I point the details out to these people, and I say, isn't this exciting? In my country we do it this way, in your country you do it this way. And a possible reason for that, I think, would be this or that reason. And they may be totally bored with my explanation because they're just going about the motions of life. The thing I had to remind myself on one of my international trips is that the people in the other country aren't necessarily any more self-aware than the people in my own country. That when I talk to other people from the United States and ask them, why does this make you happy, they don't know. Or to ask, where does this pattern, this familial pattern come from, and they don't know. But to those who have studied those dynamics and can say what the reasons why are, it provides a much richer experience of each moment of life. And once you know why things are the way they are, then you can even get creative at steering them in new and more empowering directions. If we have thoughts, and they're not emotions, but emotions and thoughts are like collaborative partners. By coming up with thoughts that move our emotions in positive directions, we lead a more fulfilled life. By having joyous emotions and becoming aware of the thoughts behind them, we lead a more holistic, empowered life. As we have a more holistic and empowered life, we become capable of things that we might not have ever thought of attempting prior to that moment. I suppose it kind of comes back to that wonderful quote from the movie Anti-Mame, starring Lucille Ball, that I watched a number of years ago, when she keeps remarking to her nephew Patrick from time to time, life's a banquet and most poor sons of bitches are starving to death. Telling him that you need to look around you and see the possibilities and the opportunities and not be content with just following the rut in the road that has been set by hundreds, if not thousands, of people marching that way before you. that there's no reason to live in a rut. There's no reason to be average and normal and mundane and boring when there is so much about which one could be excited and so much passion with which life could be lived. But it requires both thought and the willingness to feel whatever it is that we feel. I hope my comments of the last half hour have been helpful to you. Thank you very much for watching.